For our class, we're going to talk a little bit about securing your Shephelah. And what's your Shephelah? Anybody know what the Shephelah is? The Shephelah is actually a region in Israel, and we're going to talk about it here in just a moment. We're going to look at Obadiah 18 or 19 because that is where it is mentioned in the Bible. It says, "Those of the Negeb shall possess Mount Esau, and those of the Shephelah shall possess the land of the Philistines. They shall possess the land of Ephraim and the land of Samaria, and Benjamin shall possess Gilead." So this is a picture of what the Shephelah looks like. It's a lowland region that's between the sea and the hills of Judea. So nice rolling hills. And with me living in California, this is like the foothills of the Sierra Mountains. Between the Philistine plain and the hill country where God's people dwelt lay 10 miles of low rolling hills. This buffer zone was known as the Shephelah. Now, who lived near the sea? Anybody know who lived near the sea in Israel during the Old Testament times? How about the Philistines? Who's the most famous Philistine?
Goliath?
Goliath. We're going to talk about Goliath in just a little bit. But this was the buffer zone. You had the Philistines were living along the coast, and the Jews or the people of Israel were all living up in the hills, and they had a buffer zone in between them. Shephelah comes from the Hebrew term shephel, which means low, lowly or humble. Sometimes Shephelah is translated foothills or the lowland, depending on which translation of the Bible you have. But the Shephelah had 5 valleys, and the valleys were vulnerable. So what do you think of when you see a valley when you're in the mountains? What are valleys? They're nice and flat. They may have a river running through them. Which would you rather travel through if you're going through an area? Would you rather climb up and down the hills or go through the valleys?
Valleys.
Well, some of us would like to be up in the hills and take our time. But if you were an army, you probably want to go on these valleys because it's very quickly that you can go through. So there's 5 east-west valleys that divide the Shephelah over a distance of 40 miles from north to south. And I've been to Israel, how many times have I been there? 4 times now. The thing that always amazes me is how close everything is. From the north of Israel to the south of Israel, and when we look at the history in the Bible, it's only a couple hundred miles is all the distance is. It's not very big. But these valleys, the names of them form an acronym, and it's ASEGAL, a seagull, the Ajalon Valley. Anybody know what happened in the Ajalon Valley? We're going to find out. How about the Sorek Valley? Anybody heard of the Sorek Valley before? Or the Elah Valley, the Guvrin Valley, or Lachish, or Lachish is how it's usually pronounced in English. Valley, these all have significance in the Bible, and we're going to talk about some of these and the importance of securing this area. And we'll draw a parallel with our own life. So here, way up here is Jerusalem, but the Ajalon Valley, and then this is the Sorek Valley, and then this is the Elah Valley, and the Lachish Valley. Oh, sorry, the Lachish is here. This is the Guvrin Valley. But these valleys, and if you can see on the picture, what do they appear on this picture? Do you see? They're green.
Little green strips.
And this is a satellite picture. So what do you think is in those green valleys? Nice rivers that run through there. There's crops growing. Very vulnerable. Who wouldn't want to own these valleys? The Philistines wanted them. The Israelites wanted them. So these were very key valleys. So what does Israel need to do? They need to secure them and make sure that they're safe. The 5 valleys were fertile, ideal for planting, but they also gave easy access to the hill country. Where's the armies going to come? They're going to come right up there. Okay? As a result, Israel had to guard this buffer zone carefully. Do you think we as Christians, we need to have a buffer zone? We need to have some distance between us and our enemy. What do we need to do with our buffer zone? We need to guard it. We need to secure it. So the Ajalon Valley, this valley runs between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv is the capital of Jerusalem, and Jerusalem, did I say Tel Aviv was the capital of Jerusalem?
Yes.
Tel Aviv is the capital of Israel, and it's more down in the coast. And Jerusalem, of course, is the spiritual capital for the Jews. But this is a picture of the Ajalon Valley. So in the Bible, it talks about the Ajalon Valley during the conquest. Remember, Joshua had come across into Israel, and he defeated the Amorites, and he prayed, "O sun, stand still at Gibeon, and O moon in the valley of Ajalon." However, the Hebrews failed to drive out the Canaanites who lived in Gezer, so the Canaanites lived in the midst of Ephraim to this day. But remember the story of the long day, where the Israelites were chasing after their enemies, and Gideon said, "Help us," and the moon stood still and the sun stood still. That happened in the Ajalon Valley. So the important thing here also was they didn't drive out all the Canaanites who lived in Gezer, which is in this valley, and they continue to live in there. If you have enemies living in your buffer zone, is that good? It's not so good. If you have people in your buffer zone that are not good people, is that good? It's not so good. History will show us what a foolish decision this was. The Canaanites of Gezer in the Ajalon Valley influenced the tribe of Ephraim away from God. Solomon later received the city of Gezer as a wedding present. And he wisely fortified it to guard one of the critical entry points to the hill country and to Jerusalem. This is iron gates at Gezer, big gates, 3-chambered gates. These are some of the larger gates in Israel. And I was down there walking through these, and it's just amazing. You walk down in here and you just feel the security that this city had from their enemies. And here, just to show I was at Gezer, they have these standing stones at Gezer because this was the Canaanites originally. They worshipped these standing stones. And so this is an old geezer at Gezer. Okay. The Sorek Valley is where Samson was. Samson was in the Sorek Valley. Samson was born there between the city of Zorah and Eshtaol. And this is up on a hill is Zorah. And then this hills come down here, and then there's this really nice big flat valley area. And so Samson spent his life pacing up and down this valley that served as a buffer zone. And we all know many of the stories of Samson. What's your favorite story of Samson? What's the most interesting thing that Samson did? Maybe killing the lion and making the riddle about the honey and the bees, or the something sweet coming out of the strong. Or maybe you like the story of Samson and Delilah, but that's an example of, keeping your buffer zone. But his carnal curiosity took him westward toward Timnah and the Philistine women. And Timnah's way down here in the valley. And the valley at that time was controlled by the Philistines. The hills were controlled by the Israelites. He made a compromise that eventually cost him his life. We all know the story of Samson and Delilah, and how Samson lost his sight. Okay? So here, this is the Sorek Valley. And we see Timnah here, and we see Zorah. But the Philistines come up through this valley and then get up into the hills and head toward Jerusalem. Okay, so the Elah Valley, the next valley we're going to talk about, let me just show you where the Elah Valley is. Elah Valley is down in here, and here's Gath. It's actually usually pronounced Got in Israel. But who is from Gath? Anybody know who was from Gath? Goliath. Goliath of Gath. So Goliath was here in Gath, and over here, this Azekah, this was a big stronghold, but the Elah Valley runs along through here. But this area right here, the Elah Valley, this is where David and Goliath had their big battle. And you can see here, there's fields there. This field right here, where the battle took place, one year when I was over there, they were growing melons there. Another year, they were growing wheat. So they grow different crops in this valley because it's very fertile. But it's also, it's an area where the armies can easily move through there and be able to have access to the hills. Okay? No one had the guts to stand up to Goliath. And if David had not stepped up to the plate to defend the Shephelah, the Philistines would have had easy access right up into the homeland of the tribe of Judah. Okay? And I can see, because I'm very close to here, you can see the melons laying on the ground there where they were growing melons. Okay? At home I have some stones that I picked up in the brook of Elah. And that's where David picked up the stones that he used in his sling. So the next valley down is called the Guvrim Valley, and it is representative of Judah's hard hearts. They had this limestone gnarly crust of the valley that can be compared to the hard hearts of the southern kingdom of Judah. The prophet Michael is from Moresheth Gat in the Guvrim Valley, and his most famous verse revealed God's standard for those who would walk with him. He has told you, O man, what is good and what does the Lord require of you but to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. So here again, here is the Guvrim Valley. It's further down, but it's another very important valley that runs through the hills. Here's a picture of what that valley looks like, and this valley is not as broad as what the other valleys are, and not as fertile, but also very important. And from Moresheth Gath is where Micah was from, and Micah's message of coming judgment upon Judah's compromise was only tempered by the hope he offered of the coming Messiah who was born in nearby Bethlehem. And if we come back and we look at here, Bethlehem is over, here's the Guvrim, and Bethlehem is actually a little bit up over here. But it's actually Nevi Samuel. Here's Jerusalem here. And Bethlehem is maybe down in here, just off the map. But all of these valleys would give access up into the hills. So that was very important. Libnah is another city that was in this valley. And in 2 Kings 19:8, the Rabshakeh returned and found the kings of Assyria fighting against Libnah, for he heard that the king had left Lachish. We're going to talk about Lachish or Lahish in just a little bit. But any of you remember the story of Sennacherib, the Assyrian, how he came into Israel and he destroyed all these cities? He destroyed all these cities by first having to capture all of these valleys, because without capturing these valleys, there was no way he was going to get to Jerusalem. Okay? So we're going to talk next about this valley all the way down here. This is Lachish Valley. And I've actually spent quite a bit of time in the Lachish Valley because I've been 2 years on an archaeological dig in Lachish. And I'll show a couple pictures of it to you in a little bit. But the Lachish Valley is named after this prominent city of Lachish. And this is a really big, what we call tell, which is the remains of the cities that have been built up over time. And this was the second most important city in Jerusalem at the time of the kingdom of Judah. Israel and Judah? Okay.
No, you said in Jerusalem.
In Jerusalem again? Did I say? Okay. It was the second most important city after Jerusalem in the time of the United Kingdom and later the divided kingdom. And it was the southern outpost of the kingdom. It was very important. It was very well fortified here. So King Hezekiah, he was one of the good kings, and King Hezekiah did a lot of reforms. He tore down a lot of the false idols and returned the kingdom to God. But because King Hezekiah trusted the Lord, he rebelled against Sennacherib, who was the king of Assyria, who sent an army in retaliation. So you got to remember, a lot of times Israel and Judah, they were subservient to other countries. But Sennacherib came and he defeated the impregnable city of Lachish. Hezekiah told Sennacherib, I have done wrong. Withdraw from me. Whatever you impose on me, I will bear. Because if he saw that Sennacherib could capture this city that was so heavily defended, he's like, what's he going to do to Jerusalem when he gets there? He could not stand against him. But Hezekiah learned that giving in to the enemy didn't satisfy the enemy. It only whetted his appetite for full surrender of Jerusalem. So when Sennacherib got done capturing Lachish, he headed to Jerusalem. His defenses were down. There's a very famous, when Sennacherib went back to, I got to remember what slides I have on here. Hold on just a second. I'll give you a little more history here. So after Sennacherib defeated Lachish, he headed up to Jerusalem. And he besieged Jerusalem, but he never captured Jerusalem, because who do you think intervened? Who do you think intervened when Sennacherib went up to Jerusalem? John. Who intervened? God. Do you know how God intervened? He basically just destroyed the army in the night. They just died. And so there's a, I don't have it on here, but there's a famous saying that Sennacherib had Jerusalem shut up like a bird in a cage. It was in his full power that he could just crush it. And overnight, the Lord sent an angel and destroyed the army of Sennacherib. So Sennacherib went back to Nineveh, and he built this, had this big palace, and in his palace, he had created big reliefs. A relief is like a stone carving of everything that happened at Lachish and his destruction of Lachish. It's like probably this whole room, maybe 2 or 3 times the size of this whole room on the walls. This whole story, like a cartoon, of his capture of Lachish. Do you know what he said about Jerusalem? Nothing. Because he only wanted to show what he did good, not what had done bad. There's a lot more I could talk about Sennacherib. I like to talk about the history. But the important thing that we need to look at is, are you securing your Shephelah? Throughout Old Testament history, Judah's strength was determined by its control of the Shephelah. If Judah had a presence in these valleys, they were strong. If they yielded and allowed the enemy to gain a foothold, they were weak. We need to make sure that we know our areas of vulnerability. Defend yourself so the enemy cannot gain a foothold. In your relationships with unbelievers, always ask yourself, who's influencing who? Are you influencing your friends, your colleagues for good? Or are they influencing you for bad? Are you finding the lies of the enemy with the truths of Scripture, memory, and meditation? Do you recognize that harboring an unforgiving spirit gives the devil a foothold in your life? These are things that we need to be very careful of when we are dealing with our friends and even our family and our colleagues. In your relationship with unbelievers, always ask yourself, who's influencing whom? As you take the high ground in your spiritual walk with God, realize you always have an enemy attempting to get at you through the Shephelah. You got to build up your borders. You got to secure them to make sure that you're strong. Okay? How much more time we got? John? I don't know what time. 10 more minutes? Okay. So I'll just show you some pictures from Lachish. So, have you ever heard of Lachish before? It's one of those cities that it's mentioned in the Bible, but none of our favorite stories happen in Lachish. Maybe some war stories and things like that. But one of the things when you're working with archaeology is layers. And this is the gates of Lachish and the approaches to Lachish, and this is like a newer representative of a newer time period. This is representative of an older time period. But what happens in these cities is they get attacked, they get destroyed, they level everything out, and they build on top of it again. It gets destroyed, what do? They level it all out, they build on top of it again. So in archaeology, you have layers of things that go right on top of each other. And this is an example where there's different layers of things. And I don't have pictures in this presentation, but they found something very interesting in the gates of Lachish just a couple years ago. One of the things that archaeologists do is they don't dig up everything. They leave some stuff to be dug up again later when you maybe have better technology, better understanding. And so they went back in and they excavated more of the gates of Lachish. And they found in one of the chambers of the gate, they found what had been a little temple. Was it a temple to God, do you think? No, it was a temple to like Baal, or to Canaanite gods, because they had turned away. But at the time of Hezekiah, and they're able to date these things, Hezekiah, with his reforms, they went in and they destroyed this little altar. The altars would have little horns on them, and they broke off the horns of the altar. And what they did, very interesting, is they turned this little worship area into a toilet. Okay? They took a stone toilet and they put it in this area to symbolically do this, because Jehu in the northern kingdom, when Jehu did some reforms, he actually broke down a Philistine temple and turned it into a toilet. And it was a desecration, you know. That's not something you want to have anywhere, is a toilet. I mean, you want to have them, but you want them in the right place, right? You don't want them in a worship place. So they were able to find evidence of his reforms. This is where we were digging, and this stone right here is where a pillar would sit to hold up the roof. And we're digging down in this area, we'll find all kinds of pottery, and you're able to tell from the pottery what time period it was. Here's what an active dig looks like. See all of this area where you're digging in squares and you have these sandbags around. And as you dig down, you had to be very careful when you're digging, because you're pulling up pottery and you're looking at pottery and trying to determine how old it is. You're looking for bones, maybe animal bones, so you can tell what kind of food they ate. And you're looking for, sometimes you find beads, sometimes you find coins, a lot of different things. But it's very hot, very dirty. But one of the things that you really want to find, you want to find an inscription. Why would you want to find an inscription? You want to find a written record of something that somebody has left. Maybe sometimes on inscriptions you might find somebody's name, and you find it in a layer from a time frame where the Bible is talking about a certain person and you find a piece of pottery that has a person's name that's the same. What does that help us do? It helps us to confirm history. So remember I talked about how Sennacherib had come in and he had attacked Lachish? He built this huge big ramp up against the walls of the city. And they had big engines that they take up the ramp so that they can attack the walls. This is just a book that was written about Lachish that I have at home. But we also have a lot of fun on the dig sometimes because we have to block the sun to get pictures, and here I am working with my friend Luke. You can't really see him, but we're blocking the sun. But another thing you had to watch out for, what do we have here?
My scorpion.
It's the scorpion. And we would find scorpions there, so you had to be very careful. You know, you don't want to grab rocks without making sure a scorpion's not living under. But look at this tail of this scorpion. You wouldn't want to have that stinging you. But here's another example where this is a stone that would have held a post coming up. Here's some rocks here. But we clean all of this area up and make it all pretty for a picture, because they will evaluate all these pictures and placement of everything. And we take pictures as you go down and uncover all these layers so that you can look back into the history of a site. And it's sometimes we were built like right on the slope where the walls were, and you see all of these buckets here. We would fill bucket after bucket after bucket with dirt. And then you have to carry that to the waste area. So it's hard, back-breaking work. And very hot, very sunny. Had to work under these big sunshades. So, but if you're lucky, you might have a beautiful sunset at the end of the day. And the breeze comes up in the evening because it's not that far from the sea, only maybe about 10, 15 miles. You start getting the sea breeze coming in and you get some beautiful nights. But archaeology is fun. I could show you lots of pictures of archaeology, but I don't have them with me. So, but anyway, the important thing that I want to bring from the class this morning is, are you securing your Shephelah? Are you securing your life? Because what's more important than your soul? And if we don't guard our soul from our enemies, we're just going to be like the Israelites. What was eventually happened with the Israelites? Because of their disregard for God and not following Him, they were all carried away and taken into captivity. But luckily for us, God brought him back, and He brought Christ, and Christ became a sacrifice for us. So, okay, any questions? No questions. Okay. So thanks, John, for letting me do the class for you. I sent him a message last week when he wasn't feeling good and said, can I either teach a class or preach? And he said, which one would you like? I said, I'd rather teach the class. I'd like to be a little more interactive. So, okay. So, thanks.
You